ancient cultures of the planet described exactly the same being without ever having known each other. Creatures of impossible beauty, half woman and half something that did not belong at all to this known world. Voices that were capable of completely nullifying the will of any adult man who heard them just once. And all those creatures were always connected to water, without exception, on every continent of the earth. The Greeks knew them, the Babylonians represented them on their sacred walls, and the Africans worshipped them. Civilizations that never traded with each other all arrived at the same unsettling and precise description. Cultures separated by entire oceans, by thousands of years, and by completely different languages from one another. Well, you can simply believe that all of this was a huge coincidence, repeated thousands of times, without explanation. Or you can dare to ask the question that very few researchers have the courage to voice out loud to this day. What if all those ancient cultures have been remembering exactly the same thing since the beginning of time? What if beneath thousands of years of mythology and legend lies the echo of an event that actually happened in this world? An event that the Bible itself describes with astonishing clarity that most readers simply overlook. An event so disruptive to the natural order of creation that God Himself had to intervene directly. What you are about to discover in the next few minutes will forever change the way you interpret the book of Genesis. Because the Bible does not mention hybrid beings casually, nor relegates them to a mere footnote in history. It describes a large-scale corruption of the human lineage, a total, deliberate, and completely irreversible contamination. Such severe pollution that triggered the most absolute destruction ever recorded in history. The Great Flood of Noah was not an arbitrary or whimsical punishment. It was the direct response to that terrible pollution. And there is an extraordinary ancient text that fills in each of the details that Genesis chose to completely omit. That text is known as the Book of Enoch, attributed to Noah's great-grandfather, and what it reveals exceeds all expectations. When you align the details of that book with the legends of mermaids from around the world, something extraordinary happens. Let's begin with the very origin of this mystery, directly in the oldest pages of the Hebrew Bible. Genesis chapter 6 is probably one of the most read and at the same time least understood passages of all. Most people know Noah, know the ark, and know the flood that covered the face of the whole earth. But almost everyone overlooks the two most disturbing and mysterious verses of that sacred chapter. Genesis 6, from verses 1 to 4, records that men began to multiply on the earth. They gave birth to beautiful daughters, and then the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were desirable. They took women for themselves, choosing from all those they wanted, crossing a line that should never have been crossed. And verse 4 declares something truly astonishing. There were giants on the earth in those ancient days. These were the brave ones who have been recognized and known since ancient times as men of great renown. Pause for a moment on those unsettling words. Children of God, daughters of men, giants and renowned men. Who exactly were those sons of God mentioned in that crucial passage of the original Hebrew Genesis? Biblical scholars have debated this issue for centuries, but one interpretation stands out above all the others. It is the oldest interpretation of all, upheld by Jewish rabbis and by the fathers of the early church. The children of God that Genesis refers to directly are fallen angels, beings of celestial nature. Angelical beings who voluntarily abandoned their own celestial domain and descended to earth. The Apostle Jude directly confirms this interpretation in the New Testament with striking clarity. Judas, in verse 6, declares that certain angels abandoned their dwelling and are kept in eternal chains. These were supernatural beings that crossed a sacred boundary that should never have been violated under any circumstances. And the children born from that absolutely forbidden union between heaven and earth were called the Nephilim. Genesis only gives us the headline of this story, but the Book of Enoch reveals the entire plot. This text was directly quoted by the Apostle Jude in the New Testament itself, which gives it weight. This clearly indicates that the early church took this text with absolutely remarkable seriousness. The Book of Enoch recounts the 200 angelic beings called Watchers descended together to the earth. They descended to a specific mountain called Mount Hermon, and there they sealed a terrible pact among themselves. A pact of collective rebellion where they solemnly swore that everyone would participate without anyone retracting. After that terrible oath, they descended to the human women and took wives from among all of them. The human wives of the Watchers gave birth to giants of enormous size and truly terrifying power. But the Watchers not only sired offspring, they also taught humans forbidden knowledge. They were taught the making of weapons, sorcery, astrology, and secrets that should never have been revealed. The ancient text describes that these giants consumed absolutely everything that human beings could produce. They devoured the crops, the livestock, and finally began to consume the blood of human beings themselves. And when the food finally ran out on the land, they turned against humanity itself with brutal violence. The entire land became a permanent stage of corruption, absolute terror, and total destruction. The cry of suffering humanity reached the heavens, and the archangels presented the case before God himself. Genesis 6, verse 5, confirms that the wickedness of man was continuous and total over all the face of the earth. Every intention of the thoughts of the human heart had become corrupt, and evil reigned without any opposition. Pollution had not left a single corner of creation uncorrupted. It was total, absolute, and irreversible. But now, a crucial question arises that most scholars and teachers never stop to ask. The Watchers took human wives and fathered offspring with them. That is clearly established in the text. That offspring necessarily included both male and female children born from that forbidden supernatural union. The Bible and the Book of Enoch focus exclusively on male giants, the most powerful warriors, the renowned men who sowed terror and destruction throughout the land with their strength and violence. However, no one ever seems to wonder what happened to the daughters born from those same unions. If the male Nephilim grew to an enormous size and became fearsome warriors, what did the female Nephilim then become? And what exactly was their fate in that corrupt world? Keep that question in your mind, because the answer absolutely connects everything that follows. God contemplated the total devastation that had consumed the entire earth and made an unprecedented decision. I would send a flood that would completely cover the entire surface of the earth, leaving not a single possible refuge. A deluge specifically designed to annihilate the corruption that had taken hold of all creation. The antediluvian world had become a completely unrecognizable place compared to God's original design. Only one man had remained completely faithful and just in the midst of that total and devastating darkness. Only one lineage in all the land had not been contaminated by the supernatural mixture that infected the world. His name was Noah, and Genesis 6 verse 9 describes him as a perfect man in his generations. Many scholars interpret that phrase not as a moral description, but as a direct reference to his lineage. An intact and pure lineage, untainted by the blood of the Nephilim that had corrupted all of humanity. God commanded him to build a huge ark, and when the floodwaters finally arrived, everything was devastating. Everything that walked upon the face of the earth was completely destroyed. Giants, Nephilim, and corrupt creatures. Or was the destruction not as definitive as the text seems to indicate at first glance to the modern reader? Because if the Nephilim were completely annihilated by the flood, a contradiction arises that is hard to ignore. Numbers chapter 13 verse 33 clearly mentions giants in Canaan hundreds of years later. The Bible also mentions Goliath, a giant warrior who terrorized all of Israel during the time of King David. And each ancient civilization after the flood continued to tell unsettling stories about semi-divine beings. Something survived the great flood in some way, or something was remembered with such strength that it could never be forgotten. Those memories remained buried under thick layers of mythology, but they never completely disappeared. Let's talk about the mermaids now, because this is exactly where all the pieces of the mystery start to fit together. Most people know about mermaids from Greek mythology and from the famous Odyssey by the poet Homer. Odysseus receives the solemn warning that his ship will pass near an island inhabited by these terrible beings. The Sirens sing, and their song is so beautiful and powerful that every sailor who hears it loses his mind. The men steer their boats towards the music, unable to stop, and end up crashing against the rocks. Odysseus orders that he be tied firmly to the mast of the ship and that his men plug their ears with beeswax. And even tied tightly to the mast, the ancient Greek text describes that he almost went completely mad upon hearing them. Think carefully about that description of a voice so supernaturally powerful that it completely nullifies will. A beauty so intense and devastating that it inevitably leads men to their own ultimate destruction. A being that in some fundamental and profound way is neither completely human nor belongs to our visible world. Where does an ancient culture get such a specific story if it has no real reference in its memory? Homer did not invent mermaids. He simply recorded an oral tradition that already existed long before his time. The earliest Greek representations of sirens did not depict them as women with fishtails at all. They were shown as women with unsettling bird-like features, with wings and claws, something much more disturbing. The fishtail came much later in the tradition, but the constant in every version was always the same. They were always feminine, supernaturally beautiful. Their voice was their main weapon, and they turned out to be deadly dangerous. But the evidence is not limited to Greece alone, and this is where this research becomes truly astonishing. In West Africa, there is a powerful water spirit known as Mami Wata, which means the mother of water. She is described as extraordinarily beautiful, with the form of a woman and half fish or half serpent, depending on the region. It is said that she possesses the supernatural power to captivate men and drag them into the depths of the water. This belief encompasses all of West Africa, all of Central Africa, and crossed the oceans to reach South America. We are not talking about a small local legend, but rather a belief system that spans entire continents. In ancient Mesopotamia, precisely where Genesis places the first major events of human history, there were beings known as the Apkallu, depicted in reliefs as half-human and half-fish creatures. It was said that these beings were supernatural messengers who had existed on Earth before the Great Flood. In Babylon, there existed a mysterious figure named Oans, described as a being with a fish body and human features. This being had supposedly emerged directly from the sea to teach sacred knowledge to primitive humans, a detail that connects directly with the Book of Enoch and its watchers who taught forbidden knowledge. In ancient Assyrian art, there are engravings of priests dressed in elaborate tunics that resembled fish, religious rituals that imitated the appearance of beings they believed had come from the water in ancient times. The Rusalki of Slavic tradition were water spirits in the form of beautiful women with a deadly beauty. The Ninyo of Japanese legend was described as a fishwoman creature whose flesh could grant immortality. The Selkies of Irish and Scottish tradition were creatures capable of shedding their seal skin and walking. They walked among humans like beautiful women and then disappeared back into the sea without leaving a trace. Every continent, every ocean, and every ancient culture of the planet came to describe exactly the same creature. Half woman, half something of the water, supernaturally beautiful, dangerous, and connected with seduction and death. You need to take a moment to stop and consider what this means from a historical and biblical perspective. How is it possible that civilizations with absolutely no contact with each other describe the same thing with such precision? This is where all the pieces of this ancient puzzle finally begin to form a coherent picture. We know from Genesis and the Book of Enoch that the Watchers united with human women before the flood. We also know that the Book of Enoch records that corruption even reached animals and nature. Chapter 7 of the Book of Enoch mentions that they sinned against the birds, the beasts, the reptiles, and the fish. The mixing and corruption were not limited only to the human lineage. They invaded the entire existing natural order. Then the great flood arrives and covers the entire surface of the earth, absolutely destroying everything in its path. The earth is cleansed by the purifying waters of divine judgment. But a question of immense importance arises. What happens to the sea during the flood if the waters cannot destroy what already lives within them? Some serious biblical researchers propose a provocative hypothesis regarding this apparent textual contradiction. If there were Nephilim on the earth before the flood, is it possible that some hybrid form ended up in the sea? And here, everything connects directly with the question we left pending about the female Nephilim and their fate. The giants described as renowned men were the male Nephilim who dwelled on dry land. They were destroyed by the waters of the flood, along with everything that walked on the surface of the ancient world. However, ancient traditions from around the world almost universally depict aquatic beings as feminine. Beautiful women with supernaturally powerful voices that lured human men to certain destruction. Exactly as the watchful angels themselves had been drawn to human women in the beginning. There could be a dark and disturbing inverted reflection of the original story told in the Book of Enoch. The fallen male angels were irresistibly attracted to the daughters of men and descended to them. What if the female Nephilim, bearers of that same supernatural nature, attracted the sons of men, captivating them with their beauty and destroying them just as their angelic parents had captivated human women? The Bible never states this directly and explicitly, and it is essential to be completely honest about it. The scriptures do not provide a verse that openly states that the female Nephilim became mermaids. But what the Bible clearly confirms is that the corruption before the flood was total and irreversible, and that corruption left echoes that cultures carried through the flood and preserved in their mythology forever. Every nation on the face of the earth inherited fragments of that memory, and transformed them into its own legends. The myths of mermaids are perhaps the clearest and most universal example of that ancestral memory passed down through generations. There is one more piece of this puzzle that is absolutely essential before reaching the final conclusion. Isaiah chapter 13 verse 21 and Isaiah 34:14 contain a mysterious Hebrew word. The word is Lilith, and it has puzzled and confused biblical translators for centuries without clear consensus. Some Bible versions translate it as owl, others as nocturnal creature, and some leave it untranslated. The ancient Greek Septuagint translates it as onocentor, a direct and explicit reference to a hybrid creature. Isaiah 34 describes the total desolation of the land of Edom and says that these creatures will dwell there. Ancient Jewish tradition developed an extensive and detailed mythology about Lilith as a supernatural female being, a dangerous and seductive being of power connected with the night, seduction, and death since time immemorial. The original Hebrew word remains in the biblical text, and its presence there raises questions without easy answers. Similarly, the Hebrew word tannin appears repeatedly throughout the Old Testament in a recurring manner. It is translated as dragon, as sea monster, or as serpent, depending on the specific context of the passage in which it appears. The Book of Job offers an extraordinarily detailed description of a creature called Leviathan in the sea, a terrifying creature that no human weapon can harm, and that, according to the sacred text itself, breathes fire. God himself describes it to Job as if it were completely real, not as a mere metaphor or an allegory. The ancient world understood in a very different way what inhabited the deepest places of the sea. The biblical writers wrote as people who took those supernatural realities with absolute seriousness. Let us now bring together all the pieces of this extraordinary mystery that has crossed millennia and continents of the entire world. Before the flood, angelic beings called Watchers descended to earth and produced hybrid offspring. That offspring were the Nephilim, beings of immense supernatural power who corrupted all the known earth. The Book of Enoch confirms that corruption extended even to animals and the natural world as a whole. God sent the flood and destroyed the world as it existed, but each subsequent civilization carried ancient stories. Stories of strange, semi-divine beings always connected to water and possessing their supernatural beauty. Creatures that were mortally dangerous to the mortals, who were irresistibly drawn towards their own destruction. The Greeks called them Sirens, and West Africa has known them as Mami Wata since ancient times. Babylon represented them on its sacred walls, Japan described them in its texts, and Europe feared them on its shores. These stories are neither random nor whimsical. They are too consistent, specific, and too universal. They are distorted memories over time of real beings that once existed in a world that no longer exists. They are the persistent and indelible echo of a pre-Diluvian world that God destroyed, but that humanity never forgot. They are the female Nephilim, the forgotten daughters of the Watchers that the Bible does not fully describe in its pages. The origin of the oldest, most universal, and most persistent supernatural myth in the entire history of humanity. And there is one last biblical detail that closes this mystery in a way that is truly overwhelming. Revelation 21 verse 1 clearly states that in the new creation, the sea will no longer exist. Of everything Juan could have mentioned about the new land, he specifically names the disappearance of the sea. Some theologians believe that the sea represents in biblical literature the realm of chaos and spiritual darkness. The abyss, the deep, the place where supernatural forces dwell that God has not yet fully judged. If the sea has that deep spiritual meaning connected to the corruption prior to Noah's great flood, then their definitive removal in the new creation would be the final closing of a door that has been open for millennia. A door that has remained open since the ancient days of Noah, the Nephilim, and the spirits of the water. The Nephilim, the mermaids, the water spirits from 100 different cultures, all finally closed forever. All of it finally disappeared completely, totally, and permanently in the new creation promised by God. The sea will never exist again, and with it, the last echoes of that corrupted world will be forever silenced. If these biblical mysteries have sparked your curiosity, subscribe now to continue exploring them together.